Okay, so yeah, so so we'll discuss about this very nice strategy called dynamic programming. So some of this material you might have already seen, I guess, but I guess there is something new to learn from here. We'll start from scratch. Okay. So suppose this is the general paradigm. Suppose we have a problem that we wish to solve, and we have this instance, right? Input instance given to us. This instance could be anything depending upon the problem. So it may be a graph, it may be a set of numbers, a matrix, something, right? Now, the way you want to solve this is you want to take the input and you derive smaller instances out of it, right? So maybe a large graph, you derive a small graph. So you derive maybe from a large set of numbers, you derive a small set of numbers. That's a smaller instance. You derive maybe two or more even of them. Then you say that I'm going to solve this smaller instance, the smaller graph, let's say, and by finding the solution to the smaller instances and by combining them, we get the solution to the input instance we want. Okay? We wanted to solve in the first place. Now, how do we solve this smaller instance? We'll do the same thing again. We'll take it and divide it into even smaller instances. Say this B1 and B2. Similarly, the other side also we will again divide and keep going. Right? Now, there is a name for this, right? So it's recursion or induction. We have all seen this. Now, dynamic program also has a similar structure, except that we are going to do one important thing, which is we can say that's the gospel of dynamic program that differentiates it from normal recursion is that don't repeat the same work, save and reuse, right? So say I started from this input instance I and we derived this A1 and A2, right? And now the A1 gave rise to B1 and B2 and the A2 gave rise to B3 and B4. Now it may be the case that this B2 instance derived from A1 that A1 gave rise to and the instance B3 that A2 gave rise to, maybe they are just the same, right? Then in the case of recursion, if you see they are not merging, they will keep proceeding on their own. The B2 will split and go, B3 will split and go. So the dynamic program, the thing is you consciously figure out whether you have seen this already, right? Whether have you solved this already. If so, you don't, do the same work again. Save that result and reuse. So that's the thing about dynamic program. So this is one slide nutshell what dynamic program wants to do. Okay. So now we'll see examples. We'll see several examples of dynamic program, 5-6 examples in this lecture. Right? So the first example. Okay. So before going there, so this is how it will look like finally. You start off with your I and then you derive some problems. In general, this is how it will look like. Now each of this subproblem gives rise to something, this subproblem gives rise to something, but maybe there is some reuse. Like this subproblem derived from here and the one from derived from here, they are just the same. So we can see that it will give rise to a graph, a directed graph. So so it will be a directed graph with the parent giving rise to children problems, and the same child may be shared by multiple people like this, right? If they want to use the same sub problem, and finally there will be these very small problems where shown in squares here, where you don't want to divide them any further, but you just solve them. They are too small. You just go and solve them, right? Now that's how it will look like. And when you want to solve the, once you realize the structure, the way you will finally write your program is to go backwards like this. So you will first solve these small things that you know how to solve, then use their results to solve this next layer of problems, then the next layer of problems, and keep going up. Finally, you will get to know how the solution to I. So it will have this directed and acyclic structure, parent-child structure to it. So this is how the general dynamic program problem structure will look like. Now, so we are going to see several examples of this DP phenomenon, right? This strategy, this paradigm. So the first one is perhaps one of the earliest examples, I would say, of dynamic program, the Fibonacci sequence, right? So we all would have seen the sequence, I believe, at some point, right? All of us would have seen it, but I don't think any one of us would have seen Fibonacci himself. So I put a portrait of him taken from Wiki, and the thing you see on the top is a statue of Fibonacci in his hometown. That's also from Wiki. So what is Fibonacci sequence? So it's a sequence of numbers where let's recollect this. So the nth number is obtained by adding the previous two numbers. F of n is f of n minus 1 plus f of n minus 2, right? So you start off by seeding this sequence with f1 is 1 and f2 is 1. f3, you add the previous two numbers. 1 plus 1 is 2. Then how do you get the f4? You add the previous two numbers. 2 plus 1 is 3. Then 3 plus 2 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. And you keep going like this, right? So that's the Fibonacci sequence. Now, suppose we wish to, let's say, compute f of n, right? So somebody gives you the number n, the index n, and they ask you to find the Fibonacci number fn, right? For example, f5. We want to find this f5, right? So this is how the normal recursion will work, right? To know f5, what do we need to know? I want f3 and I want f4, right? Now, if I want f4 here, then I need f3 and f2. Luckily, f2 we know that's an initial number, right? f2 is 1. Then the f3 will give rise to f1 and f2. This f3 will give rise to f1 and f2. So that's how this recursion tree will grow. So now, in this example, this number of computations is 9 computations, right? At every point, let's say it's a computation. You look up or you add or you do something. So in general, you can see that this tree is going to grow exponentially in size, right? Now, so let's see how dynamic program can do this. Even this program you would have seen, but let's see it in this reuse. Let's see it explicitly happening. So you can see that this f2 equal to 1, that's the same as another f2 equal to 1 here. Similarly, why are you computing f3 again and again here? Once you are computing it here, once you are computing it here, you can reuse these two, right? So therefore, you can kind of shrink this entire tree into a much smaller DAG, right? Like this. f5, it needs f3 and it needs f4 and it needs this f3. f4 needs f3, but we have already done it. So you just reuse, don't recompute. And so similarly, f2 can be reused by f3 and f4 and so on. You see that it has become a much more compact structure, right? So in this example, you'll just need 5 computations to get this done, right? There are only 5 nodes in this DAG. So in general, this will only take linear time, right? There will be only one node per index, right? f1, f2, f3 each will appear only once in this DAG. So it's a linear time process. Okay. So I hope this is easy. Now we'll see how to do this backwards. We would have written this program a lot of times, right? We have done this already, but let's see it in the terminology we've been using so far. So we want to do this now backwards on this DAG, right? We see that this is how the DAG structure looks like. So we want to go backwards. So you start doing it from the bottom, F1 and F2, then keep going up, right? So this is how the program then will look like. F1 is 1, F2 is 1, then from 3 onwards we keep going up, right? So by doing Fj is Fj minus 1 plus Fj minus 2, right? Now this, so we store this thing here, right? This value of Fj for future use, right? So that has a name called memoization, which is according to Wiki again, it's the Latin for remember, it seems. So looks like memorization, yeah. So this is how, it looks like. This is the general structure of it. So that's about, I guess, about Fibonacci sequence. So we have written this program already, but we are just reinterpreting it. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So this is the general framework of how a dynamic program will work, right? So the first thing you do is that you identify these sub-instances, right? So given the bigger instance, you first want to know what are the two sub-instances that you wish to solve, right? Two or more, right? What are all these smaller problems? You need to know how to identify them. The second thing is, once you solve the sub-problems, how do I combine the solutions to derive the solution for the larger problem, right? That is a recurrence relation. So for example, in the Fibonacci case, the sub-instances are easy. F of n is the larger problem you want to solve. It gives rise to two sub-instances. What are they? F of n minus 1, F of n minus 2. Simple. So that's identifying the sub-instances. Then the combining the two sub-instance solutions to derive the larger one. In the case of Fibonacci, that's quite simple. It's just simply addition. Take the solution from the left, take the solution from the right, add it. That's it. Now, so the important thing that will determine the running time of the dynamic program would be how many instances are there. That's going to be one of them, right? What is the size of your DAG? How many sub-instances did you solve overall, right? So that is going to be important, right? Because you are going to build that tree. So it shouldn't be too many, there should not be too many sub-instances sitting there. So we have to derive a bound on how many of them are there. What is the size of the DAG? So as it turns out, in the case of Fibonacci, it's easy, right? We are just finding f of 1, f of 2, f of 3 and keep going up, right? So there are only n of those sub-instances. So it's a linear time process. So that is how the general framework, and this is how it works in Fibonacci as the example, toy example. In general though, all of these steps may become quite complicated, right? They become non-trivial, right? It may be non-trivial to identify, first of all, what sub-instances should I be dealing with. The second thing is, how do I combine them may become non-trivial in some cases. The DAG structure may not be so simple, it itself may become complex. In the case of Fibonacci, how do I prove that my program or my recurrence relation is correct, right? The proof is trivial because this is what that sequence wanted us to do, right? So we have just expressed it here. So there is no need for proving that this is a correct program, right? But in general, it may need a proof to say that this program is correct, what I've done is correct. So that may become non-trivial. And finally, this may become non-trivial quite often, that how many sub-instances are there, right? So that may need some combinatorial arguments. And then there is the final one, the most interesting one, that you may need to generalize your problem. Right? You may not be able to write a dynamic program in the original problem. You may want to slightly generalize it or tweak it, and then write the dynamic program for the tweaked version, and at the same time ensuring that I can get answers to my original problem from this tweaked problem. Right? So that is one other thing. So all these things may happen. So in the subsequent lecture, right, we are going to see example problems where we'll see some of these phenomena, right? Maybe not all, but some of these phenomena. Deriving a bound, generalizing the problem. So we are going to see examples. As our examples become more complicated, all these things will manifest there. Now, why do we want to do this dynamic program and go through all this trouble? Because many seemingly exponential time problems, they all become fast and they admit polynomial time dynamic programs, right? So using this strategy, you can derive faster programs. And there are many problems, research problems, for instance, where the only polynomial time algorithm known for them is through dynamic program. So yeah, okay. So that is the motivation for doing this. So with that, we are going to see example problems, 4 or 5 of them. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Now the first problem we are going to pick is called the the subset sum problem. Okay. So the problem is this. Some of you might have seen this, some of you might not have. So let's define it along with some examples. So the problem is that you are given a sequence of numbers, okay, and are also given a target number t, right? And your goal is to check whether there exists a subset whose sum is exactly t. And you are not supposed to pick the same element again, right? No repetitions. So you are given these numbers. You can pick any subset of those numbers, right? Without repeating the numbers. Your goal is to see whether you can get this target t, right? So for example, here is one example. 5, 3, 2, 6, 8. Suppose these are all the numbers given to us. And let's say my target is 17. Can I get 17 from here? Yeah, here is one way. I pick 3, 6, and 8. Right? That is 3 plus 6, 9 plus 8, 17. Now, here is another. Suppose I want a target of 13. Then I can pick, let's say, 5, 2, and 6. So that is 13. There may be another solution also, more solutions possible. 8, 2, 3. That will also give 13. But it may be the case that there are targets which are not achievable from this given input. Right? So for example, in this input, 12 is not possible. I just checked it. I hope it's not possible, but yeah. Right? So there are cases where it's not possible. Okay? So now, so what is this problem then asks for? You are given this input, you are given this target, and you are asked, can you get that target or not? Just tell me yes or no. Can you get it or not? We can generalize it. We can say, give me the solution if it exists. That's fine. Right? They are about the same. First, tell me if it exists or not. Right? Then maybe I'll ask you, give me the solution. Okay? Now, so that is a problem. Any questions on what the problem is? Okay. So now, so what is a naive algorithm for this? What is the straightforward way of doing this? What you can do is you can try all possible subsets, right? Take this input and try all possible combinations, all subsets, and see whether any one of them gives rise to this number target or not. So what is wrong with this, right? So what is wrong? Because there are too many of these subsets, right? If my input set has got n elements, then there are these 2 to the n subsets possible out of them, right? Which is too many, right? 2 to the n. So we'll try to do better, right? Better than this 2 to the n. So that's what we want to do. Right? So we'll derive a dynamic programming based algorithm that runs faster than this 2 to the n. There are some caveats there. We'll see them later. There are some ifs and buts, but we'll get there later. Right? Yeah. That's the goal. We want to run hopefully faster than this 2 to the n. Okay. So this is how my dynamic programming is going to look like. So I am given the input instance I, right? Suppose let's say that there is that solution, right? If it doesn't exist, okay, but maybe it exists, right? So I'm going to see whether it, how it looks like. So say this solution S, it's sitting there up there in the clouds. I can't see it closely, but it is sitting there. Now what we are going to do is we are going to make guesses on how it looks like, right? So what we'll do is that we'll first make a guess on the first number in the input sequence, right? For example, this number 5. We are going to make a guess. Does it have 5 or not? Right? So that's what we are going to guess. Two choices are there, right? It either contains a number, this first number 5, or it doesn't contain. So there are 2 options there. So we are going to kind of explore both these options, right? Let's first assume that it exists and let's see what happens. And then assume that it doesn't exist and see what happens. So that's the strategy. So let's see that. So suppose if it doesn't contain first number, right, we are going to write a recursive program for doing this by making these choices, right? By making these assumptions. So suppose S does not contain the first number 5. Let's say it doesn't. That's our guess. Right? Then what can happen, right? Then we have to throw out the 5. Then this solution is sitting there, and we are saying that we are assuming that it doesn't have 5. Then it should only be made up of 3, 2, 6, 8, right? This suffix, right? And it should be able to somehow able to get this target T, right? So it's clear that this input I has a solution only if and only if this suffix has a solution, right? With the same target T. So that is my first sub-instance. So I'm going to recursively check whether this suffix has this solution with target T or not. That will be the option. That will be the way we proceed, right? Under this case. Now, suppose if S, our guess is that S contains the first number, that is the second guess. We have to explore that possibility also. In that case, I have the 5. I have already assumed that it contains there, so I have picked it. Then what should S do? We assume that it has 5. Then from this remaining thing, what should it be getting, right? So the target is likely should be changed, right? So it should be target minus the first number, because it has already picked the first number 5. But target was, let's say, 17. 5 is, we assume that 5 is already there. So it should get the 17 minus 5, 12 out of this remaining suffix, right? So our second subinstance then would be, the second exploration would be this subinstance, which is made up of this suffix 3268, the same as the before suffix, except that the target we are slightly changing for the second subinstance. We are saying that it's going to be 12 now, or the target t minus the first number, right? So these are the two instances we are going to recursively solve. One is the same, the suffix is the same, 3268, but with the same, the first initial target t itself. In the second case, the same suffix, but with a modified target of t minus first number. So these are the two things we are going to solve, and that is shown here, right? So it's here. So you can see our initial setting is 5, 3, 2, 6, 8, 17. That is the problem we wanted to solve. Can you get 17 out of 5, 3, 2, 6, 8? Instead, what we did was, we said that we explored the two options. One is 3268 with the same suffix 17, with the same target 17. This is the branch where we assume that 5 is not there. Then there is another branch where we assume that the 5 is there. So in which case it's the same suffix 3268, but we are reducing the target, because 5 we think that it's already there. So we reduced it to 12. We have to explore these two options further. So 3268 has to go further into, you can first say that maybe 3 is not there, that is this option, 268 with that 17. Then there is this branch where we assume that 3 is there. So you only get 268 as the suffix, but you adjust your target from 13 minus 3 to 14, right? 17 minus 3, which is 14. And you keep going like this. Similarly, you have to explore this other branch also. You first assume that 3 is not there. You get the 268. Then assume that 3 is there. Then also you get the same subset, same suffix 268, but with a refined target of 12 minus 3, which is 9. And this keeps going. Any questions on this, how this tree proceeds? This is the recursion tree going around. Is this fine? Okay. Now, let's go back and see this in terms of a program quickly. So this is how this program will look like if you write it out using recursion, right? So you are given this input I, which is A1, A2 to AN with the target T. Your goal is to find, does there exist a solution whose sum is exactly T? And what you are doing is, you are constructing one instance, which is this instance, which assumes that A1 is not there in that solution. So it will say A1, A2, A3, AN, the same target. Then it will construct another solution, another instance, A2, where you assume that A1 is there, and so you revise your target to T1, T minus A1. Now you solve A1 and A2, right? Now, when can I say I has a solution? Only when either A1 has the solution or A2 has the solution. At least one of them should have the solution, because I'm exploring both the options, right? So I'll say that I has a solution if A1 or A2, at least one of them has a solution. And I'll solve A1 and A2 recursively, as we saw in that diagram, right? Now, this can be succinctly represented using the recurrence relation. This is the recurrence relation for this dynamic program. It's simple. It says that okay, there is a small bug in this recurrence relation. So you want to say solution of I comma t is solution of I minus a1 with the same target t. Another is I minus a1. This is the bug. I minus a1, but with the revised target of t minus a1. Right? So you can succinctly represent it like this. So if you have a solution for this instance or for this instance, then you have a solution for this instance. That is it. This is the recurrence relation succinctly representing this program. There is a small bug, which is this should be written as I minus a1. So I hope this is clear. Now you can blindly do memorization on this. You don't need to do anything further. Write this program as a recursive program, but do memorization, which means that yeah. Hello? Yeah. Yeah. So this is just the, yeah. You have to add back this. This is just for the Boolean answer. Do you have a solution or not? Do I have a solution or not? This R is the Boolean R. Yeah, this is yes or no. Yeah, so as Neelama mentioned, if you want solution, actual solution, you have to slightly adjust it here, right? Like in this later case, you have to get that solution and you guessed that A1 is there, right? So you have to add A1 to that solution here if you want to construct solutions. But throughout this talk, we'll mostly not construct solutions, right? We'll find is there a solution, what is the cost of the solution, and keep going. Because it's more or less fairly straightforward to adjust these recurrence relations to construct the solutions. Okay, so yeah. Now we can take this recurrence relation and blindly memorize it, right? Which means that before you solve a recurrence, before you start solving a instance recursively, like in this A1, you go and check whether you have already done it or not. Okay, so that's it. Before you do anything, just check, have I done this before? Then do it again. Don't do it again. You have already solved it. Reuse it, right? And similarly, whenever you solve the problem, store that answer somewhere so that you can reuse it later. So using that, you can blindly memorize this this algorithm if you want. However, let's we'll see how to we'll also write an explicitly memoized program, right? The most natural, better ways of writing this program. Okay, we'll see that. But before going there, so this is a algorithm what we have here. To take this algorithm, you memorize it. Then the question then is, what is the running time of this algorithm, right? If you do this along with that storing and reuse, right? So the answer will depend on how much reuse did you get, right? So in other words, how many really instances exist in this tree, right? Once we say identify reuses, right? So for example, here is a reuse, right? This says that it's 6.8. This is also 6.8. It's using the same target also. That's the same sub-problem. 6.8, 12. 6.8 with the same target, 12. That is a reuse. Whereas this one is not a reuse, right? Because both of them have the same subset, 3.2.6.8, 3.2.6.8, but they are having different targets. They are different problems then, right? This guy is trying to check for, is there a 17 sum subset? This guy is trying to check, is there a 12 sum subset, right? Even though they are having the same set in hand. So there is no reuse here. This is a legal reuse, right? Proper reuse. Same set and same target. So that is a reuse. So the question then is, that's what this Weisman comes and asks. So we have written the recurrence relation, we have written the tree, everything is fine, you have done memoize. But the crucial question is, it's all fine, but how many sub-instances are you solving? That's the thing. So, because the number of sub-instances is the one that is going to determine what is the running time of your program is going to be, right? So we have to derive a bound on this now, right? That's the main thing of dynamic program, right? So we have identified the sub-instances, we have written down the recurrence relation, we have done the memoization, fantastic, but now bound the number of sub-instances. Okay, so let's get into that. So the thing is, how do these sub-instances look like? You can see that they're all suffixes. The sets are all suffixes of the original problem, right? So 5, 3, 2, 6, 8, both on the left branch and right branch, we removed this 5 in constructing the new instance, right? In this case, we threw it away. In this case, we assumed that we have picked 5, but the sub-instance as such doesn't have that 5, right? It has only this suffix in it, right? So every instance, when it asks for a recursive solution, it always removes the first element and construct the suffix as the instance set, right? Like here also, 3, 2, 6, 8. I guess 3 is there, I guess 3 is not there, 3 is there, but nevertheless, the set I get for my new instance is the suffix, right? 268, 268. So, therefore, the number of subsets is the number of suffixes. The target, right? We have been changing this target, so we have to be careful. So it's 17, it's 14, 12, you're being 10, 9, you're changing your targets, right? So I really don't know what an instance gets as its target, right? So we need to account for what is this targets are going to be. But how many targets can be there? My target is always a number between 1 and t, right? Because we always do only subtraction, right? I start from 17, either I keep it or I subtract and go to a smaller number. Then I again do a subtraction, go to a smaller number. I never grow my target, right? So my target is always going to be this number between 1 and this original target t, right? So there are at most t of these targets then, right? So the number of subsets is only n, number of targets is only t. So the total number of instances possible is n times t, right? So we can solve this subset sum problem. Then my DAG structure will have only nt size in it, and we can solve this in time order nt. Is this better than 2 to the n, the naive algorithm? Well, it depends on how big is my t, right? So if my t is much bigger than 2 to the n, maybe you may want to just use the naive algorithm. But otherwise, this is better, right? If your t is fairly small enough, then this is a better algorithm. Okay. So as an aside, these algorithms are what are called pseudo polynomial algorithms. But yeah, let's not go there. Okay. So now, how did this happen, right? How did it happen that instead of 2 to the n, instead of 2 to the n, you suddenly got it down to nt, right? Let's start at this one. It will become clear, right? So the thing is simple. Both the recursive algorithm, which is the naive algorithm, which may run up to time 2 to the n, and our algorithm are constructing pretty much the same tree, right? Except that these targets, right? There cannot be too many targets. That's the whole idea, right? So whenever you take a subset, so it's something like this. What is this? How was this instance is constructed? If you see, right, this 6, 8. How did it happen? It happened by picking 5, not picking 3, and it's by picking 5, not picking 3, not picking 2. That's how this 6, 8 was constructed. That is this branch, right? So each of these branches, right, each of these nodes here corresponds to having made some choices in the prefix, right? So this is 6, 8. We have already made some choice in the prefix. That is how this branch came off, right? Pick 5, don't pick 3, pick 2. That is how this branch came about, right? The 6, 8 branch. And what is this target? This target is simply the choice you have made here is subtracted from 17. That is how this target comes about, right? 5, 3, 2, right? So you picked 5. So you subtract 5 from 17. That is how this 2 comes along. Whereas this branch, for example, this 6, 8 branch, that node, that corresponds to this choice. Picking 5, don't pick 3, pick 2. That is the choice. So pick 5, don't pick 3, pick 2. That is a branch. So you have already accumulated 7 from there. That is how this 17 minus 7, 10 is sitting here. So each of these, both in the recursion in our case, you only see suffixes. There are only n of them. But these prefixes, right, no matter how you choose them, there are many prefixes possible with this 5, 3, 2, right? Many choices are possible. But they cannot give rise to too many targets, right? They can only sum up to a certain finite number of things, which is only t things are possible for their sum. So that is why these targets allow you to collapse these sub-instances, right? Like you took one branch, you arrived at this 6, 8. You took another branch, you arrived at this 6, 8. But the target became the same because there are too many ways of getting targets, right? So that is what the difference between dynamic program and our thing is. And yeah, so we run in this time n to the t. Now we'll explicitly do the memoization and write a very more natural program instead of saying that do it recursively and memoize. Instead of that, let's write a program without recursion, which has this memoization explicitly there. So how do you do that? You do that by solving the thing backwards. That's how you write this program. So what is going backwards here? Going backwards here means that you have to start from the suffixes and go back, right? At the bottom of this DAG is these suffixes, right? So you have to start from small suffixes and keep going to bigger suffixes, even bigger suffixes, and then the biggest, the input. That's how you have to write your program. So that's how we are going to do. So subset sum, you are given A1, A2, DAN, this target T. Does there exist a solution that sums to exactly T? That is a question. Now, so we are going to do it for every possible suffix point, suffix starting point. The suffix can start at n, n minus 1, n minus 2, right, where the suffix starts. So that is the k. Now, given that k as the starting point, the target can be 1 to t. And now write your recurrence relation, right? SKT is sk plus 1t. That is the next starting point, right? S1 will become S2. You increase your, go into the suffix. SK1t, this is the branch of not picking the kth element. This is the branch of picking the kth element, sk plus 1 t minus ak, right? So now you can actually store these things in an array, and that will give you a program. You can store the answer to this sk plus 1 t and all in an array, so you can explicitly write the program like this. Yeah, so that's about it for subset sum. Any questions? Yeah. Okay, so that's good. Now we'll see one more problem where the things become. This is an example of a problem where the subinstance you get is it's not really a suffix, but it's more than that, right? It becomes a segment. We are going to see an example of that. In this case, the subsets are kind of simpler, right? They're always these suffixes, right? Now we'll see an example where they're not suffixes, they're a little more. They can be any segment, like 532, 326, any starting, any ending, any interval can be a subinstance. So we're going to see an example, little more than what subset sum can do. So that is this matrix chain multiplication. So you might have already, I guess some of you would have seen this already. So nevertheless, we'll go through this, keeping all this DAG, memoization, all these things in mind, and we'll see, we'll work this out. So here is the problem. So let's start with matrix multiplication. Suppose we have two matrices, A1 and A2, right? Now, suppose we multiply the two. So how many scalar multiplications are there when you multiply A1 and A2, right? So you have to do the following, right? You have to take every row, multiply by every column. So that's what you have to do. So if this first matrix is of size AB and the second matrix is of size BC, B cross C, then the total number of multiplications you will do is A times B times C, right? B is this inner product, multiplying this row by this column, and you have to do for every row, every column. So each of this row column is B, and then there are A rows here and there are C columns here. So it's A times B times C. That is the total number of scalar multiplications you do. Okay. Now, is it okay? Now, let's see how to do. What about three matrices, right? We have A1, A2, A3 that we want to multiply together. Now, how many multiplications, right? So these three matrices, their sizes are, let's say, A cross B, B cross C. They have to match up for the matrix multiplication to be legal. Then C cross D, the C and C has to match up, right? So these are the three matrices. Now how about it, right? In this case, the answer is a bit tricky, right? Because it depends on how you multiply these matrices. So associativity comes into picture, right? So we can multiply these two matrices in two different ways, right? One is you can multiply A1, A2 first, then multiply by A3, right? So that will look like this. We first multiply A1 and A2, then multiply it with A3. There is another way of doing this, which is first multiply A2, A3, get the output, and then multiply it by A1. So it will look like this, right? A2, A3, get the answer, multiply it with A1 and go up, right? Because matrix multiplication is associative. Now, let's compare how these two things, do they have the same number of multiplications or different and so on, right? So let's check that out. Okay, so in this case, you are multiplying AB by B cross C, right? So how many multiplications is this? This one would be A, B, B, C, right? So that is A, B, C. That is the number of multiplications. right? And the output will be a cross C matrix, right? That is output. Now, how about this outer multiplication? So in that case, you'll be multiplying a cross C matrix with a C cross D matrix. So the number of multiplications would be ACD, right? AC cross CD, so ACD. And you will get a cross D matrix. AC cross CD, so A cross D as the output matrix. So the total number of multiplications then is ABC plus ACD. Now you can do it the other way around, where you multiply these two first and then come with the A1, right? So let's count this inner one. Here it is BC CD, right? So that one will take BCD number of multiplications, and the output will be a B cross D matrix. Now you're going to pre-multiply this with this AB matrix. So this is a AB cross AB multiplied by a B cross D here, B cross D matrix, right? So its cost will be ABD, and you'll get an output of A cross D, same as what the other guy got, right? Of course, they'll get the same output. Now, in this case, then the total number of multiplications is ABD plus BCD. That is the total number of multiplications. Now, if we compare this and this, we can see that they are different, right? ABC plus ACD, ABD plus BCD, these are different, right? So it depends on which way you multiply, right? That way your multiplication, number of multiplications will change. So here is a quick example. So in one example, you have a 5 cross 2, a 2 cross 10, and a 10 cross 3 matrix, right? Now, if you multiply it this way, then you get, the first one is a 5 cross 2, 2 cross 5. So 5 2 times 10 is 100. The other one is a 5 10 3. This outer multiplication, so that is 150. So the total will be 250. Whereas in the second multiplication, you are going to do 2 10 3. 2 cross 10, 10 cross 3. That is 2 times 10 times 3, that is 60. And you are going to multiply that by this 5 cross 2. So it will be a 5 cross 2 cross 3, that is 30. So the total is 90. So the second one is better. Okay. Now the reason is something like this. This guy is involving this thing 2 times actually. This dimension will be first multiplied here also, right? 10 cross 10, this 10 will apply in the first multiplication also, like this, as the outer thing. Then it will also again appear, right, in the second multiplication also as the inner thing. So therefore this 10, which is a heavy dimension, is using it 2 times. Whereas this guy has avoided it. He has put the 10 away so that the 3 is the one that appears 2 times. Here 2 I guess. 2 is the one that appears 2 times. So that is the way he kind of tries to save. You try to hide your higher dimensions as much as possible. Don't let them appear in this products, too many times. That's the general idea. Now, now given this, the problem is something like this. We want to solve. Suppose we want to multiply many matrices, right? A chain of matrices: A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6. Each one has its own dimension: A1 cross A2, A2 cross A3, A3 cross A4, and so on. And you would like to multiply them. Now, there are many ways of multiplying this because of associativity. One way is I can go on like this: A1 times A2, then multiply A3, then multiply A4, then multiply A6, finally the A6. Or do the reverse way, come in the reverse direction. So A5, A6, then multiply by A4, then A3, then A2, finally do the A1 multiplication. So these are 2 ways. In fact, there are lots and lots of ways possible to do this, right? Which is, I can split it anywhere I want, right? Maybe I'll do A1, A2 here. In the other branch, I'll do A3, A4, A5, A6 in this particular manner. Then, do the product. Or I can do it in a more balanced manner. A1, A2, and then A1, A2, A3 in this branch, A4, A5, A6 in this branch, and then come to the root and do the multiplication, right? Now, so how many choices are there, right? How many ways can we do this? So this number, it's called the Catalan number, and this is its formula. So 1 by n plus 1 times 2n choose n, right? And that's roughly 2 to the n. So this Catalan number is an interesting number in combinatorics. It keeps appearing again and again. So as you can see from this picture itself, right? It's one thing is it counts the number of ways by which a matrix chain of length n can be multiplied. Another thing you can see is you can also see it's it's kind of clear from here that there's a number of binary trees with n leaves. Number of full binary trees with n leaves, right? So this matrix chain is essentially different ways of multiplication is nothing but different binary trees possible, right? So so that's also the number of binary trees. It's also the number of ways to parenthesize and so on, right? And these numbers, right, I just looked up wiki yesterday to know why they are called Catalan numbers. So these are named after this Belgian mathematician, it seems, called Eugene Catalan. But these numbers are known, it seems, from very old days, right? They were known in East, China, Japan, India, and so on, the old Eastern civilizations. These were known, but this explicit formula for them, it seems, was derived by none other than Euler. But it seems Catalan worked more on them, right? He published more work on this, so they are called Catalan numbers. So yeah, now anyway, so there are 2 to the n of them, right? So that's the point. There are too many of these choices. So you can't write a naive method, right? If you go with the naive method of trying out all possible choices, then you are going to run in this exponential time. So we are going to do better. We will derive a polynomial time algorithm for this problem. Any questions? So now let's write the dynamic program. You might have already seen this dynamic program also, but let's look at it from this from this terminology we've been using so far, from this framework we have been using so far. So the dynamic program is going to do this following thing. It's going to, we don't know how this tree looks like, right? Which tree is the optimal tree? We don't know. So what we are going to do is guess the top split, right? Guess this split. Because once we know what this split is, let's say that will correspond to a split here, right? Do the A1, A2 somehow, this A3, A4, A5, A6 somehow, I really don't know. No, we really don't care at this point how this subtree is solved. But once you get the top split, right, you can recursively solve it, right? Recursively do this, recursively do the A1, A2, right? So in this, for example, if this were the tree, the optimal tree, then the top split is this. Do the A1, A2, A3 somehow, A4, A5, A6 somehow, and bring them together, stitch them together later, right? So this top split, that's the important thing. So what we'll do is, suppose we can somehow get this best split, right? Somebody gives us, right, this oracle. There is this wise man who was around, so we can ask him, somehow. Suppose we find this best split, right? Then how will we write the recurrence relation? Recursive program, it will look like this. You are given A1, A2, D80. You get the top best split somehow, right? The top split. Then I can say, find the matrix chain multiplication, the optimal solution or the cost with A1, A2, D80. So for example here, if I guess that, the best split is T at 3, then A1, A2, A3, that is one subinstance. A4, A5, A6 is the other subinstance. So you solve it, recursively, you get this cost of x. That is a way to get this cost, right? So recursively found what is the cost of, what is the number of multiplications you can do in A1, A2, A3 in the best manner, right? Recursively. Similarly, for the other side also, we do it recursively, and here AT plus 1 to AN, and that is, let's say, the cost of y is the best way of doing it. We found it recursively. Now we have to come and multiply these two outputs, x and y, right? The output of this x and this y, right? Now, what is the cost of doing this? Multiplying this x and y. How does x looks like, right? This output x will look like. It will be a A1 cross A4 matrix, right? The first and the last. A1 cross A4 matrix. This one will be a A5 times A5 cross A7 matrix, right? So the cost of multiplying these two would be A1, A4, A7. In general, if the split is at T, then it will be A1 times AT plus 1 times AM. That will be its general cost, right? So now, therefore, we can write our cost like this. This is what we are going to do. So, right now the question is, oh, I see. Okay. So now the question is, this is all fine, but how do I get this best split, right? How do I find this? Now, so that's simple. So what we are going to do is, we are going to try all possible combinations, right? How many of them are there? It's just a split. How many can be there, right? So I can either split it here or here, 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 here. There can be n minus 1 or n splits possible, right? There are not too many of those splits. So we are going to try all possible splits. Okay. So we'll say that I'm going to split it at 1, split it at 2. I guess n is not legal 1, so n minus 1. Then for each of these splits, you go on recursively solve this now, right? You solve this a1, a2 to a8 and the at plus 1 to an, get the output, you multiply this. Now, you know the cost of finding this x, right? Computing this x, and you know the cost of computing the y, optimally via this recursion. Then we have our own cost of multiplying this x and y, right? So you add them up. That is the best way of doing it. If t were the split, now you tried all these splits, you choose the best among them. This can be succinctly represented in this recursive form like this. Min mem over t, that our choice for the best split. If you make that t as the choice, then the cost you will incur is the best for a1 to at, plus the best of, plus the best for at plus 1 to an, and then the cost of stitching, which is, we know that it is a1 times at plus 1 times an, what we wrote here, right? This is the cost of stitching. Now, you try this for all possible t and pick the best. That is the solution. Okay. All right. So now let's look at how these subproblems look like, right? The way they will look like is this, right? So for example, if this is my problem and this was my top split, right? Then it will give rise to two problems. One is a1, a2. The other is this a3, a4, a5, right? And also this, an a6, right? A3, a4, a5, a6. Now, if my best split at here is this, then I'll get two more problems. One is a3, a4, a5, another is a6. Now, so we can say that the subproblems that we are going to generate, they need not be prefixes or suffixes or anything, right? But luckily, it's always going to be an interval. This is the thing, right? It's never going to be an arbitrary bunch coming out there. It's always going to be this interval here, right? So a contiguous thing. So this is how it will look like. It's only contiguous, right? So this is my topmost problem, a1, a2 to a6. Then there will be the next layer of problems, which are segments of length 5, a1 to a5, a2 to a6. Then the next layer of our DAG structure, the subproblem structure, will have problems of size 4 length, right? a1 to a4, a2 to a5, a3 to a6, all possible segments of intervals of length 4, intervals of length 3, intervals of length 2, and then the bottom is, it will just peter out with this individual matrices, right? a1, a2, a3. This is how they will look like, right? So as we said, if you want to get a program which doesn't use recursion, which is explicitly memoized, explicitly written out without using recursion, then you go backwards to write down that program. So what we have to do is, we have to write our program by considering these segments in their increasing order of sizes, right? These intervals in the increasing order of sizes. So you start with segments of length 1. There is nothing to do there, but yeah, they are just individual matrices, but yeah, fine. So you start from here, length 1, keep going up to 6. So let's write that program. This is how you have to then write it. L, that's my length of the segment, right? So L from 1 to n, and I have to solve it for all possible segments of that particular length, right, in that layer. So I go back. So what are all those segments of length L? That's what I have to do here in this loop. Every possible segment of length L. Now, all these segments of length L, they will have a starting point, and then they have the length L, right? So I'm taking all possible starting points, 1 through n minus L, because if you start later, you will go past that n. So n minus L, then this is where that segment will end then, S plus L. That's where it will end, right? Then this is my segment, S to S plus L. That is a segment being considered now. Now, I want to find what is the best way of doing this segment, S to S plus L, right? Those matrices, that chain alone. How do I do that? This is the recurrence relation that we have been talking about. I'm going to get the try all possible splits now. T from S to E minus 1, right? I'm going to try all possible split. The chain is from S to S plus S to E. So I'm going to try splits from S to E minus 1. These are all the splits possible. If I have a T, then what is the cost of doing with this split? Then it is the optimal way of doing S to T, which I have already computed. It's a smaller segment, I have saved it. Then T plus 1 TE, that also I have saved it. Then this is the cost of multiplying those two outputs, right? AS, AT plus 1 to AE times AE, right? This is what I have been keeping on writing here. This is this cost, right? The cost of doing this merged, this multiplication at that merger point. That is the cost. Now, this is just one split, one possible split. It says that if you pick up this split, well, I can give you this cost. Maybe this split is good or bad, I don't know. So we are going to compare it with other splits we have done so far. So if this C is smaller than whatever I have done so far, then I take it. Right? I just store it and go. This is just like taking min over this T choices. That is the recurrence relation. That's the whole program. There is no recursion here. That is explicitly memoized program now. Now, what is the running time? You can actually see from the program itself and tell, or also you can look at the DAG structure and tell. It's all segments of length 1, segments of length 2, segments of length 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. So it's a total number of segments possible. So the number of them is n square. That's the total number of segments possible. Actually, n choose 2, I guess, right? Yeah. Now, for every possible segment, you may have to try different splits, but the number of splits cannot be more than n again. So that is the number of splits. So the total running time of this algorithm is n cube, right? So the table, if you look at this this recurrence relation, the number of tables you draw would be, I guess here, the number of tables you draw will be quadratic, right? It's n square, 1 per segment. But the program becomes n cube because your recurrence relation is more complicated. It says that find a min over t. So it's a more complicated recurrence relation, right? So this is somewhat different from what subset sum was doing, right? Subset sum, the recurrence relation was simple. You know, the merger was simple. It simply said, take the Boolean R. Fibonacci was even simpler. It simply said, I guess, take the sum. That's all the Fibonacci said. Whereas matrix multiplication says something complicated. It says that take the min over n things, right? So the running time is slightly blown up then. It becomes this, you have to multiply by this n also. So that is the n cube. So what this means is that our algorithm finds the optimal solution and its running time is at most n cube. Any questions? Okay, so so this problem, next one we are going to see, is called the largest monotone subsequence problem. I guess some of you might have seen this one or a related one, but yeah, but I hope we'll be able to learn something new, maybe from this, this new perspective or something, right? So we'll see. So the problem is something like this. You are given a sequence of numbers, okay, and the subsequence is a selection of numbers, okay. So from that sequence, you choose as a subset of those numbers, but in that order, right? You choose. Then such a sequence, we call it monotone if it is in the increasing order, right? And the objective is to find a monotone sequence which has the largest sum. That is a problem. So here is an example. So this was the sequence. I am going to pick 10, 14, 20. Is that legal? Yes. Because 10 to 14 is bigger, 14 to 20 bigger. Yeah, it's increasing. So this is valid, and it's the profit you get or the value you get out of this sequence is 20 plus 14 is 34, plus 10, 44. That is what you will get if you pick up this sequence. So our goal is to find a sequence which is monotone and has the maximum value, profit or value. Now, here is a sequence which is not monotone. It says that I'll pick 8, 21 and 14. This is not monotone because 8 to 21, which is fine, increased, but 21 to 14 is bad, it decreased. So it's not valid. So here is another solution which is better than this 44 solution. It says that I'll pick 8, 9, 14 and 20. So yeah, you can sum it up and you will see that it's 51. And I believe this is the optimal. Okay. This is the best solution possible. So our goal is to find the optimal solution, the best solution. Any questions on the problem definition? Your goal is to maximize this sum. Any questions? Okay. Oh, my screen is full. Okay. Is it visible now? Okay. So now let's see how to design an algorithm. Let's play with it a little bit. Okay. So here is my attempt 1. Okay. So let's start from the first number and go to the next biggest number, right? So and see how far you can go. So start from 10, 8 you cannot pick, 25 yeah, jump there, and that's it. The sequence will stop because all these other numbers are lesser than 25. You're not able to go further, but this is the algorithm. No, keep going as much as you can, right? Starting from the first number. But as you can see, this number, this sequence you are trying just stopped right now, right? So it gives you only 35 as the profit. However, we have already seen one guy with 51, right? So that's not the best. Now let's try another one. Now maybe it's wrong to start from 10, right? Maybe start from every number and see what happens, right? Try all possible numbers as the starting. So for example, okay, start from 8. Okay, he also got stuck at this 25. It's just 33. Now you can try 9, he will also get stuck, right? 30. Right? So you're not getting that 51. So we have to, so greedy will not help. So if you look at this solution, it's not greedy. See, it started from 8, which is fine, but it purposefully skipped this 25 because it knows that there are better things to do than to pick this 25 now. Because if you pick the 25, you may get struck, right? You may not have any more options left. So skip it. It gives you good profit, but don't be greedy. Don't pick him. He's kind of going to kill a lot of people. So instead skip and go. And then skip. He's skipping the 21 also because he knows that something better is coming up. Right? So that's the thing. So you have to start and you need to know how to skip this properly, right? To get the best solution. So yeah, that's the thing, right? This is what I was explaining. It is coming here, right? You have to skip properly to get this. Now, how do I determine the skips, right? So you can use the naive algorithm, which is try all possible subsequences. Take every possible subsequence, check whether it's monotone or not, and among those monotone sequences, choose the best. This is roughly an exponential time algorithm. Okay? It will roughly take 2 to the n. Okay. So we are going to do this in polynomial time via a dynamic program. Again, by looking at this structure of this solutions and so on. So here is our dynamic program. Let's go back to that, similar to that subset sum dynamic program. The opt, I don't know what is opt, but it's sitting up in the cloud. I'm going to make guesses about it. So the first, what choices I'm going to make is guesses. Does it contain the first number or it doesn't contain the first number? That is the choice I'm going to make. You contain the first number, you don't contain the first number. Okay. So these are the 2 choices. Okay. Now, let's explore these choices and see what happens. So suppose it doesn't contain the first number. Then what is my subinstance? What is the recursive thing I need to solve? Well, I threw a item, so there is nothing to do. You see what you can do with the rest. So the sub-instances is simply this, the rest of it, that suffix, right? And I can take any solution to A1, the optimal solution, and I'll get a solution to my original instance also. So if 10 is not there, assuming that 10 is not there in that opt, then the optimal to the whole thing is nothing but the optimal to this sub-problem. I can simply take it without any work. So you find the optimal solution to A1 recursively, you output it, you are fine. Assuming that 10 is not there in that opt. But 10 may be in the opt, so you need to consider that possibility. So if 10 is there in the opt, then you need to, once you pick 10, that's what it means, right? You have picked 10, which means that a lot of people will die because of that. He'll go and kill the 8, he'll kill the 9, okay, I missed it, he'll kill the 7 also, okay? So then the sub-instance would be this, right? You'll get that 25, 21, 14 and 20. These are all the people who are remaining, right? So now you have to solve this sub-instance, right? 25, 21, 14, 20. You have to solve this sub-instance recursively and find the optimal, right? Now, once you do it, then the optimal for the original instance is, you can add the first number to it. That's the advantage, right? Because you picked that opt and then you went in, you find the solution to this thing, you can add your 10 to it, right? The first number plus opt of A2. So what is the difference? So in this case, you don't kill anybody, that is good, but you don't get to add the 10. Whereas here, if you decide to pick 10, you have killed a lot of people, but you get to add the 10. So that is the two choices. So this is how the recursive algorithm then will look like. Let's call it the algorithm, our algorithm as monseq. It takes A1, A2 to A, and its goal is to find the largest monotone sequence. So it constructs two sub-instances. One sub-instance is A2, A3 to AN, right? The entire suffix like this, where you assume that I'm not picking the first element. The second one is this is the assumption that we are picking that first element. So you can only pick elements who are bigger than A1, right? Here you get all the elements. Here you get only the elements who are bigger. Now that is A1, A2. You solve them, find opt 1 and opt 2. In the first case, you can't add the 10 to it, right? Then the solution you'll get is just opt 1, right? You'll only get the best of this. In the second case, you take the best of this, which is opt 2, but you can add A1 to it, right? You get some benefit for killing, right? You get that add on A1 also. So that is your S2, right? You can add to it. And you can now choose the best of these two. Right? That will cover both the possibilities of picking A1 and not picking A1. So I just output the best of S1 and S2. And this can be succinctly represented in this manner, right? Opt of I is the best of A1, A2 to AN. No, this is just throwing away that A1. Or pick the A1, get its profit, but inside of it, the sub-instance you get, you kill all the people who are less than A1. You pick only A1 greater than A greater than A1, right? So this is the succinct way of writing the same algorithm. So while writing dynamic programs, most of the time people will only simply give you this recurrence relation. Don't even bother to write algorithms and this and this. Just tell me the recurrence relation. That's good enough actually. That tells the the entire solution more or less. Now we can, as before, we can memorize this in a blind manner, right? Write this recurrence relation, but have memorization around, right? Whenever you see a sub-instance recursively, you store its solution, and whenever you want to solve a sub-instance, first go and look up whether you have solved. Yeah, you can do that, right? But we will do it. Now we'll write an explicit program for this also, right? But before going there, let's ask this question. Our wise man is back asking the same question. He says, he asks, how many sub-instances are here, right? The same question, right? So we identified the sub-instances, we wrote a recurrence relation, but the question is, how many sub-instances, right? So let's check that out. Let's see what happens. And so we are going to, okay, so let's see this. this is the thing. This was the first branch, right? It said that I'm throwing out 10, right? So then this was the instance you got. Then it will make two choices. It will either throw out the 8 or it will keep the 8. If it throws out the 8, then this will be the instance. Whereas if it throws out, it picks up the 8, then this will be the instance, except that 7 get killed. Now let's see the other branch. This is the branch where you pick the 10, right? So in that case, you will kill the 8, 9, 7, and this will be your instance. Or within that there are more branches, right? So if you see, the thing is, it doesn't have a nice structure like our prior problems, right? So this was my subproblem structure for matrix multiplication, matrix chain multiplication. They were all contiguous segments, right? Which was nice. In the case of subset sum, he was also nice. He was even better. He was just suffixes, which is nice, right? Now, matrix multiplication was a little more complex. It involved segments, but it was at least contiguous, right? Here, it was all contiguous segments, which is nice. But this problem is a bit different, right? It's not contiguous even. Let's see that. See, look at this instance. It is this instance, but 9 and 7 go missing, right? So, how many sets am I going to get? So the wise man asks, right? Are we going to get all kinds of subsets out of this, right? Then we are in soup, right? Because if it throws up all kinds of subsets, then there may be 2 to the n subsets will come out, right? 2 to the n sub-instances will come out, right? That's a problem. Because in matrix multiplication, if you see, the way we derived this running time bound was to say that the number of segments is only n square. But now, if all segments come out of it, all subsegments comes out of it, then we are in trouble, right? Because 2 to the n subsets may come out, then yeah, that will be the running time. So we are not making any progress over the naive algorithm. Okay, so let's address this issue in 2 ways. The first way is we are going to derive a bound on the number of subinstances, right? We are going to say that even this problem, even though it looks like it may give rise to all kinds of subsets, it will not give rise to too many of those subsets. We'll argue that not too many subinstances can come out of it. That's one way. So that is almost like we are going to derive a bound on it. The second thing is, second method we'll do is to overcome this issue by generalizing the problem a little bit, right? So why I want to be doing this is I want to show examples of these two phenomena that we wrote in the beginning, right? A dynamic program, we may need to do 2 things, right? One, you may need a combinatorial argument for bounding the number of subinstances. You may also need to generalize the problem in some cases. So for this problem, you can overcome this issue we raised by doing either of these 2, and we are going to show both of them. Okay, so that is the 2 things we are going to show. But as this wise woman says, I'm just making a mountain out of molehill here. Both these are quite simple. It's not nothing much, right? These 2 things. So they are very small things actually. So but let's do them. Okay, it's not much. Okay, so here is the first thing. Let's count these subinstances. Even though it looks like many, but it's not too many actually. Let's see this. So what are these subinstances? So let's see. Look at this guy. He's fine. He looks like a suffix to me. No number is missing, so it's fine. It's contiguous. This subinstance, it looks nice to me. It's contiguous. Here, well, this is a bit of a trouble. It's not really a suffix. Okay, it's a bit contiguous, but it's not really a suffix. But it's missing something from being a suffix. But that number missing is less than 8. Right? With all the missing numbers here, in this case only 1, they're all smaller than that 8, this number, right? Some number which we have already seen. Similarly here, a lot of things go missing. A 9 goes missing, 7 goes missing, but they're all smaller than 10, some number which we have seen already, right? Similarly here too, this will be the subinstance, but all the missing numbers are, they're all smaller than 10. I think I made a mistake here by, by putting, this has to be pushed here. They're all missing less than 25, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So let's try to make this into a lemma and argue this. Okay? So each sub-instance you get out of in this game is a suffix of the original sequence with some numbers missing, but all the missing numbers are smaller than the number which we have already seen, a prior number, which we call the pivot. So this is the statement. So it says that you are only going to get suffixes. Some numbers may be missing, but these numbers are less than some particular number that I call the pivot of that suffix. Okay. Now, so all the missing numbers will be less than that pivot. Okay, that's the thing. Now let's try to prove this. Suppose if it is true for suffixes of certain size, right? As we go down in this recursion tree, suppose inductively we have made sure this property is true. Now let us see whether we respect this property when we build new subinstances like this, right? We have been building subinstances. We are fine so far. When you build a new one like this, let's see whether this property is true or not. Okay, let's prove that it's true. And the proof is quite small. It's like this, right? So here is this instance. Something, this is a suffix, something is missing, but I am guaranteed by induction that they are less than some pivot p. Now, if I decide to leave this cube or pick this cube, these are the two options. Now, if I decide to leave this cube, these numbers that are missing, they are still less than p, right? That's how they were less than p. I dropped the cube, they are still less than p. The missing numbers. So fine, p can still serve as the pivot. The other case is, if I choose to pick q, right? But in this case, this q is not getting killed here, right? Why didn't this p kill q here? Why is it not missing? Why is it alive there? Because it's bigger than p, right? Right? This q is bigger than p. That is why it's not crossed out here. So I can pick it. I picked it, and now I make q as the pivot, right? I kill all the people who are less than q now, and maybe I kill one extra. So these two are already being killed by p. I decided to pick q, and this q killed one extra person, this person, but I know that all these are now lesser than q. I kill only persons who are less than q, right? Because q itself is greater than p. P has already killed these two. Q is bigger than P, so he's still bigger than these missing numbers. He is killing one more extra person, he is also bigger than that, so he can serve as my pivot. So what we have argued is that my sequence always has a pivot, right? It is a suffix with some missing numbers, but the missing numbers are all smaller than some pivot, right? And I satisfied this property in constructing new numbers. Whenever I construct a new instance, I can show you that it is a suffix along with a pivot, and all the missing numbers are lesser than that pivot. So that is true. That's it, right? So therefore, now we can ask this question. Now how many sub-instances, right? Right? So a sub-instance, right? It is a suffix with some missing numbers, right? But all the missing numbers are smaller than some prior number called a pivot, right? Now, how many suffixes are there? That is easy. That is like old story, right? At most n suffixes. How many pivots can be there? A pivot is some number, right? Some prior number. So there can be at most n of them. So the total number of sub-instances is only n square. Even though it looks like all things may come out of it, but only n square can come out of it, right? So I can memorize it, and I can do it. So this algorithm, our algorithm will find the optimal solution, and it will run in time n square. That's the number of sub-instances. That's it. Any questions so far? Yeah. Say that again. Yeah. No. Pivot is just some auxiliary number given to you. It's not to the. Yeah. It's some number. Yeah. The pivot cannot be to the right, right? The pivot is always some number I have seen already. Right? Like this Q becomes a pivot. He is appearing before this sequence. He is somebody whom I have seen already. Like this here, right? So It's either this 8 or this 10 or this 25. It's some number that I have seen already. Yeah. Yeah. They may be, but I am guaranteed that I can find a pivot so that all the missing numbers are lesser than this pivot which appears earlier. You can use pivots from later also. Yeah, you can. Because all we want is this, right? That there are at most n pivots. That's all I'm interested in. Yeah, you can use any pivot. You can use it from later also. Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah. So that's it, right? Now let's compare to the greedy methods, right? Well, so which we have this we have kind of done already, but let's quickly do this. So this is like we have already seen what is the issue with the greedy methods, right? So you start from 10, you say I jump to the greedily jump to the next bigger number, so which is 25, but you are getting stuck there. Now this attempt 2 also got stuck. Remember, 8 jumped, 9 jumped, but everybody is getting stuck. You can't do it greedily. You have to skip, right? Like our optimal solution, right? You have to purposefully skip. And the way, so our optimal solution, I guess, is it sitting here? No, it's not here. So our optimal solution, remember, it skipped properly, right? Like this. It started from 8. It purposefully skipped to the 25. It could have picked. There is nothing wrong in it, but it purposefully skipped. Now, how did that happen? Why did greedy miss it and we picked it up, right? Greedy landed up there. This greedy also landed up there, but our guy, properly missed it, right? Jumped it properly. The reason is that once you pick 8, you have to go to this 25. Greedy picks it, but what we are doing is we are saying that I'm not going to pick it right away. I am going to solve this recursive instance here, right? And that recursive instance, he will decide whether to pick 25 or not, right? When you solve this, that will be his first choice, right? When you solve this instance, do I pick 25? Do I not pick 25, right? That is his choice. So that recursion, he will tell whether to pick 25 or not. Don't greedily pick now itself. You can make the 2 choices of whether to pick 10 or not, but don't decide on 25 right? You shouldn't decide. Let the recursion decide on that, right? So that's the thing. Okay. So that's how this dynamic program, this is essentially how the recursion is working here. Now, this was the first method. Now, there is the second thing, which is you can actually generalize this problem. Okay, that is the second method. Remember, we told that you can overcome the issue in 2 ways, right? The issue was that there are numbers missing, right? Now, we derived a bound on the number of instances. We said that it's not more than n squared. There is also another way to come out of this situation, which is to simply slightly generalize this problem, which is actually going to have somewhat, arguments and flavor similar to this this proof actually, right? It's not going to be entirely different. It's pretty much that. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so should we do this or take it after the break? How do you want to do this? I don't think so. Yeah, it's just 2 slides. Maybe we'll just do it. Yeah, that will be better. Okay. So this is just the same thing, but we are going to express it in a different way. So we are going to generalize the problem a bit, right? So the generalization is this. The generalization we are going to call it pivoted largest monotone subsequence problem. This is the largest monotone subsequence problem. This one is pivoted, right? So in this problem, we are going to be given a sequence of numbers and a number called pivot, okay? An extra thing. This is what the original problem will give, just a sequence of numbers. In the new problem, you'll get an extra thing called a pivot. Now, what is the objective? The objective is to find the largest monotone subsequence involving, this is the same as before, largest monotone subsequence. That's what you want to find as before. However, there is a condition imposed on you that you can only use numbers larger than p. It's kind of crazy that I give you a sequence, and then I tell you that I am giving you a pivot and you cannot choose anything smaller than that pivot. Well, you could have the guy who constructed the input could himself have removed those numbers because I can't use them anyway, right? It's true, but nevertheless, let's just deal it this way, right? The recursion will work out nicely. So you will be given the sequence, you will be given the pivot. You are not supposed to use anything that is smaller than p. Now find the largest monotone subsequence, right? This pivot it's an extra condition that I can't use anything less than this p, right? So is the problem clear? It's somewhat contrived, but is it clear? Yeah. Now let's write recursion for this, okay? Let's construct the first subinstance, same as before. Can I pick the first element q? Q is the first element, right? Can I pick it? Do I want to pick it? Don't want to pick it? Now, if I don't want to pick it, my set will become this, and my pivot will remain the same. If I decide to pick it, right? Well, wait there. You may not even have the option of picking it, right? Because I can only pick numbers that are bigger than p, right? So if q is smaller than p, I may not even have this option. I may have only one option, drop it. If q is bigger than p, I have the option of picking it, and I pick it. It's possible only if q is bigger than p. In that case, I add it, and now q is bigger than p. Okay, so now what I am going to say is that q is my pivot. I am going to change my pivot in my new subinstance. Because the original guy said that you can't use anything bigger than p. I have this number q things by picking q, but I won't kill anybody explicitly. I'll just use this pivot mechanism to implicitly enforce that nobody is smaller than this q is chosen, right? So you see the difference? It's like in this, when you construct the instances here, right? When you construct the instances here, if you pick it, you go and explicitly kill people and create confusion, right? Now, okay, this picture is not drawn well. The idea is that I don't kill. Okay, these things I should not have drawn this. I don't explicitly kill those things, but I just make q as the pivot. That will automatically do it, right? So my algorithm will then look like this. What is my recurrence relation? Opt of I p. I have an instance I have a pivot p. If q is less than p, so the number of suffixes possible then is at most m, right? The number of subinstances you construct now, again you want to ask the same question. How many suffixes can be there, right? Because now we are not killing anybody, right? We don't kill anybody explicitly. It's just a pivot sitting there. So the number of subinstances, the sets are just the suffixes. We don't kill people. So it's at most n. But there is this extra thing called pivot, which is at most n. So the number of subinstances possible is at most n squared. So therefore, now once you solve this pivoted largest monotone subsequence problem, how do I solve the original problem which doesn't have pivots, etc., right? That's what I wanted to solve. We suddenly constructed this contrived pivoted problem. How would I go back, right? That's quite simple. You just take the same input and put pivot equal to infinity or something, it will work, right? So this is pretty much same as the other one, the combinatorial argument that we made, that there cannot be too many subinstances. But yeah, another way of saying the same thing. Any questions? So when we come back, we will do two more of this, little more complex problems.